Welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. My name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital, the sports tech venture capital company. And on this show, as you know, I interview top sports entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives. And today, one of the greatest sports talk hosts in the world is my guest today. And these people, as you know, are the ones that are shaping and changing the overall sports business industry. So today, as I said, my guest is Angelo Cataldi, the author of the book, this new book, Loud, How a Shy Nerd Came to Philadelphia and Turned Up the Volume in the Most Passionate Sports City. There it is in America. If you're looking, we're watching this on YouTube, you just got to see a picture of his book. It's amazing. Angelo is an award-winning American sports journalist and radio personality who spent over 3 decades as the host of 94.1 WIP's morning show in Philadelphia before retiring in 2023. A graduate of Columbia University's School of Journalism, Cataldi has also written for the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Providence Journal, and also just has done so many incredible things across the Philadelphia area. Has been just an unbelievable champion for the teams, the fans, more than anything else. And he's also was a Pulitzer Prize finalist and for this coverage that he did on the Philadelphia Eagles. Angelo, welcome to our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Wayne, it is an honor to be here. It's so interesting that you're talking business because you just gave all those journalistic, my resume. I flushed it all for 20 grand. I was 20 years into a journalism career and radio came to me and said, "How much you making?" "I'm making 55. We'll give you 75. I said, "Where do I sign?" That was the end of it. At that point, I all that work for nothing, just to become a nut on the radio. It's crazy.
Well, you're much more than a nut on the radio. But before we kind of dive into that, I have to ask you, right? We're taping this right a couple days after the Eagles game where they played the 49ers, and forgetting what happened on the field, but on the sideline, the Eagles security guard, Dom, I would have just loved to have heard what you and all your whole crew would be talking about him.
Well, Wayne, I've done a few interviews since that game, that awful game that the Eagles lost 42-17. And here's, I said, if I were an Eagle organization guy, I would give the game ball to the security guard, Dom DeSandro. 2 reasons. One is he got rid of one of the best players on the Niners defense. And 2 is he's the only guy that seemed to have any fight in that game. I would have given it to him because the Eagles, to me, in that game got unmasked. The Eagles are nowhere near a 10-2 team. They were nowhere near a 10-1 team. Here's why they're not. You've got to have a good defense in the NFL, and you got to defend the pass. When you're 30th in the NFL out of 32 teams at defending the pass, how do you expect to win a championship? The Eagles have a week right now to figure out what the heck they're doing wrong and to tighten up what they're doing. Because right now, they are in no position to beat the Cowboys or the Seahawks after that. Wayne, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but what we saw Sunday is the Eagles in this year after they blew a Super Bowl. And it's frustrating as hell to me. Frustrating. Oh.
Well, you certainly talked about them and blowing that Super Bowl and a lot of the reasons behind that. And that was, you talk about that in your book. I've certainly heard you talk about that on the radio. But let's get back to your career. Your career, you said you flushed down your journalism degree to go into radio. When you went into radio, and you talk about in your book how you really didn't even know what you were doing. And how did you go from not knowing what you were doing to becoming the top sports talk host in the country?
Well, I would argue the last point, but I'll say that I had the right mentor, Wayne. That was the key to the whole thing. Have a guy who has been great at everything he's ever done, namely Mr. Tom Berkshire, who was such a great Eagles player, 2-time champion. His number 40 was retired. Then he went into a network broadcast. He was an analyst, the lead analyst, most of his 25 years at CBS. And then he decided to get involved in sports radio. and he gave me a chance. And then I got a chance for 2 years to watch him do that job, which frankly, he wasn't that, and he was great at broadcasting, but he hadn't done a talk show like that before, but he knew how to do it. And about a year into it, I didn't. And I wasn't committed to it. I still thought I was a writer. And it was just before Thanksgiving in I guess it was 1990. And he just said to me after a show one day, you better wake up. I'm getting tired of carrying your sorry ass. He said that. That was out of character for Brookie. But he said it, and he woke me up. And the next year, I made much more of a commitment to it. I worked much harder at it. And by the end of that second year, he said, good, now I can retire. And he handed it to me. And even without much experience, the fans gave me an opportunity to learn on the job. And that's how I got to last that long.
Well, you mentioned the fans, and it's certainly a theme throughout your whole book. It's amazing how many people you recognize, and many of these people were just callers. They weren't. I wouldn't say just. They were part of the fabric of your show. These are people that you knew. These are people that you traveled the country with. How did you decide, or how did you figure out that was going to be one of the key things that you needed to do, is really just reach all these fans?
Yeah, that's the key to the whole decision. It was a business decision. When I started, I was doing a lot of what Brookie was doing, which was guests were really important. You would pontificate for a while on a topic, and the callers were there, but they were not the focal point of the show. And then over a period of time, we did all these crazy stunts to get attention, the most notable being our wing bowl and all that went into it. But by the halfway point, 15 years or so into it, it's gradually, it came to me that we're talking to the best fans you could ever talk to. They care so much about this stuff. They're the show. They're more important than all the other people. And that's when you saw callers become stars in their own right. Arsenani, Eagle Shirley, Butch from Manioc, they all had their own shtick. Will of God, which was not for everybody. But the point was, they were the real stars of the show. It wasn't the hosts. It was our reaction to them. When the Eagles had a game, win or lose, the listeners driving into work that morning wanted to know what Eagle Shirley was thinking. How was she handling the loss? And that kind of thing. And once we got to that point, it was a lot easier to do the show because they were always there for me. In order to do not everybody realizes this way. When you go in the morning at 6 o'clock and hit a button, there aren't like 12 lines lit waiting for people to talk to you. Most of the time, there aren't any lines lit. And you have to wake them up, make comments that, connect with them and kind of get the ball rolling every morning. It's a big challenge. And when the fans became the stars, they began to realize that they were going to get a bigger platform. But I'm not saying I did that right away either. It took a long time. The fans, the callers, were the stars of the show, the last 15 years of the WIP morning show. And that's when we did our best work.
Well, you talked about 6 a.m. So to be a morning sports talk show host, you have to get up really early.
2:30. 2:30 in the morning. I went to bed at 6:30 or so, lights out. Got up at 2:30, caught up on everything that happened that night. And then 6 o'clock, good luck. You're on the air.
So did you ever watch or go to Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football games?
Yes, I watched it. Eagles were a different thing. You had to watch it the same way a fan did because you had to react to it in real time. Like if something happened and then Chris Collinsworth would say something stupid, which is very common, all right? You would need to react to that to the extent that, like, I would immediately write it down and go, I'm going to need to play him saying that on the show the next morning. So those were the exception. Baseball playoff games, anything big, you'd have to tough it out. But it was hard because that's 4 hours of energy, real energy. And if you are tired, by that third hour, Wayne, you are crawling up a wall. It's hard. So I always needed that 7 or 8 hours sleep in order to be able to, get that much energy for the show.
Well, you talk about 4 hours. That is a long time to talk. That's a long time to be on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And to do that, you assembled over the years an incredible group around you, an incredible team, your team at WIP. You talked about Brookshire. Then from the beginning, you had, Al Morganti and Rhea Hughes and Tony Bruno, and then Keith Jones for so many years. And then, it was so interesting how you then brought in a guy like Joe Conklin, as a comedian. How did and your producer Joe Wechter and just all the different people that made it all happen? How did you assemble that team, and how did you lead them to all the success that you had?
Believe me, all of it pure luck. Remember, I have no experience doing any of that stuff. Joe Wechter, who was our producer the whole time, he was already at WIP. So I just took him from another show because the morning show gets dibs on the best people. Joe Conklin was working with Jody McDonald and was looking for a larger forum in, primetime radio, his morning radio. So we got him that way. None of that had anything to do with me. Al Morganti got us into radio when we were doing it part-time. Al on the air was a one-line master. He was great with the coming back at you, stuff like that. Al made all the big decisions that we made for our show. Al was the brains of our operation. Rhea Hughes was so much more instrumental in our success than people would ever know. The last 5 years, Wade, she carried me to the finish line. Honestly, she did so much of the heavy lifting. She's just extraordinary, an extraordinary talent, and probably the person I was most enjoyed working with. And Keith Jones, let me just tell you about Keith Jones. This is how accidental he was. He just convinced Al one day, because they're both hockey guys, that to come in and sit in with a show with us. So he comes in. He's doing a great job, right? But he wants to really end big. So he says at the end, we go into the final segment. He says to me, give me a minute at the end. I want to tell a great joke, right? So I said, okay, I hope it's all right. So he comes back and he goes, I just wanted to end with something. I want to tell people what it's like when you're on the road, And he goes, so I come home from when I'm on a long road trip, and my wife Flora's waiting for me in the bed, and she says, hey, Jonesy, come over here, Jonesy. I can't tell the rest of the joke. It was that off color. It was bad. I told the rest of the joke in the book, and then Jonesy got to be president of Flyers. And I said, Jonesy, I think I got to take out part of that joke. And he goes, whatever you think, don't worry about it. But I took it out because he's just such a great guy. But he didn't know where the line was. We didn't know where the line was. In the next 20 years, the best shows we did every week were the shows he did, because he was so funny. So, he said whatever came to him. And how did that lead to being the president of our franchise? When I figure that one out, I'll let you know. But it was all accidental. You understand? None of it. There wasn't one guy that we said, all right, that'll be perfect for our show. All the other people that came on board, Ruben Amaro came on near the end. He was terrific at what's going on in the front office. All those people pretty much just sat in a day or two, and then we said, let's hire them. We had no master plan whatsoever. It was all a big accident.
But you talk in your book, and this just cracked me up. You get two hockey guys to talk about football all the time, Eagles football all the time. How did you come up with that magic?
Well, here's the thing that was so crazy about it. We really couldn't talk about hockey. In 1997, we were still treating hockey like one of the four major sports until the ratings came out. They were in the Stanley Cup Finals, and the numbers went down like they went at no other time in the 33 years, because the people listening, Yeah, they have a hardcore of hockey fan, but it's not big enough. It's not a big enough audience. We learned a lot of lessons from that. We learned how no matter what the topic is, you have to try to broaden it beyond just the fans of that sport, because otherwise you're going to lose people who are going, I don't really care. I only care about baseball. That kind of. So you had to incorporate a lot of other things, humor being number one, in order to get them to keep listening. And these two guys understood it. I swear to God, by the end, Wayne, they were happy they didn't have to talk about it, because the Flyers were awful the last 5 years or so. And they were thrilled by it. And they were good at all the other sports anyway. They're big sports fans, just like everybody else.
So I mentioned this to you right before the show and shared with you that Dan Mason is involved with us at 76 Capital as a senior advisor with us. Tell me about your experience with Dan, and what happened that one day when he visited the control room while you were on the air.
I don't know. That was Andy Bloom. Andy Bloom was a guy who I don't remember him actually coming in to the control room, not Dan Mason. He was the president of CBS Radio. When we knew he was around, we were scared. He's a powerful guy. The story about Dan, and it's so weird that you told me before we went on here that you had talked to Dan, because Dan was my champion for many years, but not one time. One time, my contract was running out, had about a month to go, and there was a CBS-wide freeze on contracts. You could not get a raise, and I had a thing. I have to have a raise every time, or with the inflation, I would be working for less money. I won't work for less money. That was my big thing, and Dan had to tell me on like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we can't meet your request. We're going to have to go in a different direction. This was with about 10 years before I actually left. And it was like, I understand, Dan, you got to do what's right for the company. He was always upfront, always honest. And then the guy I represented, who was a jeweler, Steven Singer Jewelers, got in his car and went to New York and somehow got his way into Dan Mason's office. And he sat down with the president of CBS Radio and he went, if you don't keep Angelo, not only am I pulling all of my advertising, and he was a big advertiser, I'm going to get a boycott going so that I bring other advertisers with me. Now, I did not hear this on Dan's side. This is Steven's side. All I know is the next day, the Tuesday of the following week, Wayne, we were back negotiating and we got a deal. And, Dan was a great leader. Dan, the thing about Dan was he was a real radio guy. And that's who you want at the corporate level. And I'm going to tell you something. In my experience, it was rare that you had people who truly understood at the top of the organization what the people underneath them were facing, what the challenges were. But Dan did, and that's such a big thing in business. It was so much easier for me to do my job when I knew the top guy understood what radio was.
Yeah, it's an amazing point. I mean, it's one of the things that Dan and I talk about. I mean, this idea of, and Dan was part of the investment group that we put together when Brent Musburger decided to start a 24-hour sports betting media network called VSiN.
Right.
And Dan and I were the investors and the board members, and Dan and I got to spend a lot of time together talking about people saying radio's dead, but maybe it's not. Is it still around? And this and that, and how that all went through. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was one of our top hosts at VSiN, which now is owned by DraftKings. DraftKings bought that company from us. But one of our top hosts, who still is there, was Michael Lombardi. And I know that Michael...
I love him. He was one of my all-time favorite guests. Yeah, here's the thing about Mike. Mike had two lives at WIP, all right? The first life was he was being offered around as a guest, and we booked him. And he was good. Obviously, he's extremely knowledgeable on the NFL and football. but not that opinionated. I'm going, geez, this guy, if only he'd be a little, harder hitting. And the reason why he wasn't is that he still wanted to get back into the game. And he got hired. I think it might have been Cleveland. He ended up back in the front office somewhere. And then after that ended, and he came around on his second time, then he had all the knowledge and was not afraid to give opinion. And I got to tell you, Wade, he got in trouble. He ripped Doug Peterson apart when the Eagles signed him. He said, this guy is not fit to be a coach of the NFL, blah, blah, blah. And then Doug Peterson won a championship. So, but the truth is, Mike became one of my favorite people, because what you want in a guest is somebody with strong opinion. Somebody's not afraid of whatever feedback he's going to get. And that was Mike Lombardi too. That when he got better, Mike Lombardi 2.0 was better than Mike Lombardi 1.0, but both of them are pretty darn good.
And now he understands sports betting, and he also has an unbelievably strong opinion around the Sixers.
Oh yeah, really? Let me guess, it's negative. That's usually Mike. That's what I love about him. Mike will tell you if somebody's not as good as you think they are. But the Sixers, to me, they're in a Groundhog Day kind of thing. Every year, it just is the same thing over and over again. The process did not bring us a championship, and I doubt it will.
Yeah, and speaking of Mike, Mike is also a guest on the Pat McAfee show. And what do you think about what Pat's doing on ESPN now?
Well, I watch it from time to time, and I keep saying to myself, wow, I'm glad this came along now. I would not look good in a black muscle shirt, at the straps down. Look, he's got access to the biggest names in sports. That's huge now, right? Especially if you can get those people to give their honest opinion. So I know he's paying him. He's got Aaron Rodgers every week. Even when Aaron Rodgers is hurt, Aaron Rodgers, when he speaks, those are headlines. You know what that is? That's money. That's business. That's advertising. That's what you need. So I bow to him in that somehow he was able to do that and still preserve his right to give strong opinions. It's really hard. The minute you start getting in bed with people who are part of your show regularly, it's much harder to offer strong opinions, which may contradict what those people say. Now you've got an issue to deal with. He's managed it. And that is probably where it's heading. I think it's heading more now to the more vocal members of the athletic community, because social media now is by nature highly, highly opinionated.
Well, I certainly see you now on social media, Facebook, Instagram. You're out there, which is great.
Only for the book. The book. This is business, Wayne.
AngeloCataldi.com, the best place to buy the book, right?
Yeah, because I'll personalize it. And here's the other thing. They ran out of copies on Amazon in 12 hours after it went on sale, the hardcover. So, and people are like, wow, what a big hit this book must be. No, I just don't think the publisher had that much faith in me. So they immediately issued the paperback, which is literally out today, December 5th, when we tape this. And you can get it on Amazon, but it won't be personalized. If you get it from me, I will write whatever you want me to write, including things that other professionals would consider over the line, like bleep Dallas. I'll write what the bleep word is, because a lot of people like it. If it makes somebody happy, what's so wrong with it, right? So that AngeloCataldi.com. It also gives you all the listing of our book tour, which Cindy Webster, if you want a marketing person who's spectacular, I'm telling you, Wayne, she got me on this, right? I've got like total maybe 75 stops on the book tour. Can you imagine that?
That's amazing.
Luckily, I love talking about myself, so it's not a problem.
It's really great. Well, talking about someone who is now, you mentioned with Mcafee, how he brings on players, but then a guy who's really almost like flipped the script as an active player is Jason Kelce. And
Oh,
Jason you were a prominent figure in his movie on Amazon, and
yeah.
he and his brother are really doing a heck of a job.
They're amazing. And I got to tell you, I went to the premiere of that show on Amazon, and I was not aware that I was in it at the beginning of the show. So I was comfortable. I'm sitting there. It's got a big auditorium filled with people, and suddenly I see my head on there, and I say to my wife, Gail, if they led with me, this thing is not going. It's not going anywhere. But they did a great job with it. And then at the end, here's business for you, Wayne. I go, wow, I was in that quite a bit. You think maybe I'm going to get a check? And then I was informed that during that show, which we did that was actually at the OD in Sea Isle, I had signed paperwork saying they could have whatever they wanted. So, so all I got out of it was the fame. But it was Jason Kelce. There's simply no one who's been like him in the 33 years, and it's a simple thing. He's genuine. He's honest with people. He's open, and he is so Philadelphia. I know he didn't come from here, but he connects with fans better than any other player in my 33 years. And there's a reason why, because everybody who meets him loves him. And that doesn't even address the fact that he's also a spectacular football player.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I have to ask you this. I mean, over the years, you were known for always being critical or asking the tough questions. And also, we were all, as a Philly community, we're always yearning for that championship. And yes, we got a Phillies championship, which was good, but the great was getting that Eagles Super Bowl win.
So true.
And if it happened earlier in your career, you may have had a shorter career, or maybe things would have been even different. I mean, I just wonder how you feel about that.
It's a great point, Wayne. Nobody's brought that up, but if they had won it, let's say in the 90s somewhere, I started in 1990. Would I have gone all the way to 2023? No, it was like this quest for the Holy Grail, that I actually led the chapter of it, say we won the Holy Grail. And the thing was that when they finally did it, when that ball hit the ground and the Eagles upset the Patriots and won a Super Bowl, that was the first time I said to myself, I can retire now. Now I've been doing this for, at the time it was like 26 years, 20, whatever it was, 27 years. And I went, that's probably plenty for me. And I don't have to do it anymore. I kept doing it a lot longer. We had a pandemic, all those other things happened. But it was the ultimate. And there was no way, no matter what else happened, you could ever match that again. Because for maybe 2 years, everywhere I went, including on the show, and people would call in, they would tell me about dads or grandfathers who hung on, who were ill, and hung on till they could experience that championship, and then passed away with a smile on their face. It was incalculable what that meant to the city, and to me, and to all the people who are part of WIP and Sports Radio in Philadelphia. It was the ultimate moment. And you're right. If it had happened earlier, I don't know that I would have lasted that long. I was really hoping to experience that before I was done, and I got to do it. And that's why my favorite person in Philadelphia sports will always be Doug Peterson, who had the cojones to do it, and the people I will always hate the most. It's a tie between two liars, Gabe Kapler and Andy Reid. So I tend to think of things in good guys and bad guys, and that's the way I see it.
Well, another guy I saw on your list that you gave sort of your opinion on was Pete Rose. And you talk about Pete Rose, and I bring up Pete because the world of sports has changed so much over the last 5 years since sports betting has been introduced into all this. And as you know, we're investors in a number of companies in and around the world of sports betting, and it's really changed the way teams and leagues look at fan engagement and the way it's being handled. But he did something that you just can't do. You just, as a player, as a manager, as a coach, you cannot bet on your own on your team or against your team. Those are the biggest no-nos you could ever have.
Without a doubt, Wayne. But thing is, now that the culture is different, now that sports betting is embraced by the major sports, the real issue is if he had just kept his mouth shut, I think by now the public opinion would have changed and he would have been put into the Hall of Fame. I really believe they could have justified it because sports betting is seen so differently than it was when he was a manager. But he just kept shooting himself in the foot. And a few years ago, he was in town and he ridiculed a female reporter. And that was the final straw for me. When he did that, I went, listen, I have a debt to Pete. When I first came to Philadelphia, one of my first assignments, I was terrified. I came from Rhode Island to this big city, this media giant for sports. And they assigned me to do an interview with Pete Rose in anticipation of his 3,000th hit. And I had to go into the locker room. I'm in Philly like a week or two. Find Pete Rose and ask him if he'll sit down and talk for a few minutes, knowing I'm going to need him for at least a half an hour. Pete says, no problem. Doesn't know me. We go out in the dugout. We're sitting on the dugout looking out at Veterans Stadium, the field, and he's telling me stories about hitting and that. He was a wonderful interview. He loved the game of baseball like few others ever did. And then he just didn't know when to shut up. And that's why after all that happened, I had to say in the book, no, I don't think he belongs in the Hall of Fame because he is not somebody worthy of that honor. He has dishonored himself and the game with all of the dumb comments and ignorant behavior in the years since his banishment. And it saddens me because, man, he is an ambassador for the sport until he wasn't. Then he ruined it.
Well, Angelo, this has been amazing. As we wind down here on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show, really appreciate your time, appreciate the fact that Cindy Webster did what she did to get us together here. And as you said earlier, we got to reach out to Cindy. You can reach her on LinkedIn. She'll help you get in touch with anyone and everyone to help promote your book, and as well as help her. She's
Just
amazing.
go to LinkedIn. You will not. Yeah, I don't know you, Wayne. She does. How does she knows everybody? It's great. I'm meeting a lot of people I never would have known without Cindy Webster.
She's amazing. So as we wrap up, I have one last question I wanted to ask you about. Was one of the things that we are investors in a company that was a group of guys created called Play-by-Play Sports Broadcasting Camps, and they've been around, for the Stephen Goldstein and Jeremy Treatment have been around for about 25 years doing this. They have these camps all around the country, these 10 to 18-year-olds, teaching them how to be a sports talk radio host, how to be, a sportscaster. What would you say to these young people today who want to be the next Angelo Cataldi, want to be a top sports talk, radio host? What should you do?
I have a very strong opinion on this, and it's the way I did my job. It might even be harder now in the politically correct world we're in, but don't give a damn about the opinion of the owner or the manager or the coach or the players or anybody in an organization, whatever sport it is, baseball, football, hockey, basketball, doesn't matter. Don't care what they think. If they give you negative feedback, just shrug it off. There's only one person that matters, the listener. Here's what I actually calculated this because I went through all the sports. Other than Merrill Reese, I do not know anyone that was associated with a team the entire 33 years I was on the air. No player, no coach, no manager. Nobody lasted that long. And the fact of the matter is, the only constant in radio is the listener. And the only way you're going to survive is if the father gets the son to listen and that he likes it and they hand it down from generation to generation. Too many people are trying to please the players or the owners or the coaches. They're not inviting you to Sunday dinner. I promise you. If they're ingratiating themselves to you, it's because they're molding you. They're working you. They're maneuvering you. Don't fall for it. If they don't like you, this is 2 stories of the book where I got attacked in the locker room when I was a journalist, no less, right? And the fact of the matter is, I'm still here. It was good. I got a good career out of it. Just be true to your audience. Nobody else matters. And if you get in a fight with the boss, do what I did and get a clause in your contract where he can't talk to you. That helps too.
That was amazing to read as well. Well, Angelo, thank you so much. Angelo Cataldi, the author of the new book, Loud, How a Shy Nerd Came to Philadelphia and Turned Up the Volume in the Most Passionate Sports City in America. Thank you so much for joining us on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
It was an honor to be here, Wayne. Thank you for having me.
Good luck with everything.
Thanks.